Scott Kushner, who covers the Pelicans for The Advocate, is kind enough to jump on with us here this Wednesday morning and talk a little bit about the Pels and where they are now. Scott, good morning. Thanks for the time.
Yeah, how are you guys today?
Doing good, man. That for a team that has the reputation of playing bad defense, that was a terrible performance last night.
The craziest part is they've played really good defense for like 2 months now.
Yeah.
They've like the number 6 defense since basically that 13-game losing streak end. They have I think the 6th best defensive efficiency, and it was something I kind of looked into for the last day or so. I was like, oh man, like they've been spectacular at closing out bad teams. They won 15-16 against losing opponents,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden they show up last night with 0. I mean, they played with 0. It looked like they were in the middle of the Thomas and Mack Center for the Summer League game at the 11 a.m. tip. Like it was nothing. And to play a home game when you've got real stakes and allow that, I think is pretty embarrassing for them.
Yeah, and it's kind of what you hit on the end there. I mean, well, what is the deal at home? Because right now it feels like the hype is there. I mean, we got a story linked to the document here where there's been like 175% spike in memorabilia and like merchandise sales, but every time they have a chance to reward this home crowd, it just feels like they keep falling short.
Yeah, and I've asked up and down the roster, I've asked the coaches, I've asked the front office, what is going on? Because there have been times with this team where, look, the building is certainly lacks energy compared to a lot of places.
Yeah.
There are nights where it's really empty. And I get it. Like, it's hard to get up for a game when you play 82 of them, and that's the case. That's not really the case right now for this team. They just stink at home. It's the strangest thing I've ever seen. They're so much better on the road than they are at home, and that almost never happens in the NBA. I mean, it happens occasionally for some other sports. I don't think I've ever seen it for the NBA where a team is significantly better on the road than they are at home, and they can't explain it. None of them can explain it. They just keep saying that they need to be better at home. But it's killing them. I mean, especially they have a ton of home games against bad teams coming up to end the season. And it looks, for any other franchise in the NBA, you'd say, wow, this thing is set up perfectly for them. But for whatever reason, that's kind of like against their strength. So who the heck knows at this point?
And when you look at this team, though, Scott, even so, maybe just ignoring the just putridness of last night, there's a ton of exciting potential right now, right? The starting 5, the net ratings out of control. And then you take Favors off, maybe put Melly on. He seems to complement Zion very well. What do you think about the 1-2 punch of Ingram and Zion, though, right? Because eventually, like, that has to be the combo that's going to make you most successful. What do they have to work on to where they can play off of each other a bit more effectively?
It does feel like there's a lack of space for Ingram that he had before Zion was there, and that's because Zion scores everything at the basket. Like, I don't think he takes a shot outside of 3 feet. And so naturally that's going to close guys into the paint. It turns Ingram into more of a shooter. And I think while he's been successful shooting the ball this season, a lot of it's come in transition. A lot of it's come kind of out of the traditional half-court sets. And now in the half-court, he's sort of relegated to having to shoot, and he can't create as much just from a perspective of driving. And so he's got to do a little bit more, and I think they're certainly figuring it out. I don't know necessarily. I think the biggest problem, though, is defensively they're both negatives.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge problem is, you would expect over time Zion will probably, he's got the vertical ability, certainly has the size. You would think he'll kind of improve in that area. Brandon Ingram, I don't really know. They're really struggling, though, defensively. When you have 2 big negatives out there, even guys like Ball and Holiday and Favors can't really make up for that against teams that have a bunch of weapons. Minnesota, as bad as they are, they can score, and they got totally just sandblasted at those 2 spots. Zion got killed all night, and Brandon Ingram was just horrible defensively.
Talking to Scott Kushner, he covers the Pelicans for The Advocate. I love his writing. You should go check it out over there. I had a buddy text me last night, Scott, and it was just a pure frustration text. And it's not even someone who normally talks to me about the Pelicans either, to show you that, that reach is getting there. But he's just like, I've been watching like games lately. It just seems like sometimes at the end of these games when like the Pels are down 5, they just stop running the offense. It becomes iso ball. They settle for these outside shots. In your opinion, is that accurate? And then if it is, like, why is that taking place?
It was one of the biggest problems they had during the losing streak. Was every time they got into a crunch time situation, the ball just stuck in Brandon Ingram's hands.
Yeah.
And they just try to let him basically win the game for him. And he's not LeBron James. Like, it's just that there's very, very, very few guys in the league who can successfully do that. And Alvin Gentry would drive him crazy. The problem is that Alvin Gentry is the coach of the New Orleans Pelicans. Like, he can call plays if he really wanted to. I'm not saying they could execute terribly well, but he just mostly declines to call plays. And you trust a team that, has proven that this is part of their MO, that when times get tight, they feel the game slow down, and you've seen what happens, and they just really haven't adjusted terribly well. I think that's really frustrating to fans. The players, I think, get it to a high degree. I think they hear it, and it's just not, they just don't necessarily feel it. But this is the way Alvin Gentry coaches, is he really trusts his team. He wants them to go out and play. But when you don't have a point guard who is that guy, like Lonzo Ball's a great passer and all this sort of stuff, but he can't control and dictate the flow of an offense.
Yeah.
You need something more than that. And they need to maybe just, hey, call a couple plays with 3.5 minutes to go. It's not it's not unheard of in professional basketball.
No, and it's
or coach some defense.
Yeah, well, look, but just put to Scott's point, last night horrendous. The Pels have actually been pretty good here in this recent stretch, especially by their standards. But one thing they have been good at, Scott, so you mentioned it coming in since the new year. I think they're 14-1, maybe 15-1 against teams with losing records, but they're only 3-10 against teams with winning records. What is kind of stopping them from getting them over the hump against a good team? And as you pointed out this morning's piece, you got the Mavs, the Heat, the Jazz, and the Clippers coming up in the next 10 days. So if you want to make a run at this thing before you finish up with all these terrible teams, getting a couple here would be, critical. It's needed.
Yeah. I mean, it is absolutely telling. And I think it's telling not just for whether or not they make the playoffs this year, because honestly, that's a small data point. That's,
yes,
that's like
I agree.
A college football team trying to get to the bowl game kind of thing, or who really cares in the long run, but it is a step toward where you want to go. The key here is trying to figure out exactly who works with Zion, and you don't really learn that against these bad teams. Last night you learned that, hey, even with Zion, you're going to lack energy some nights, and I think that's an important thing to learn as well. But you really got to figure out what is differentiating you from being able to beat almost any good team. And they haven't been able to shoot the ball particularly consistently, and they really are just a bad team at closing out in the last 3-4 minutes. And I think some of that's obviously on the point guards. Some of that's obviously just a lack of shooting in big situations. They don't have necessarily a closer. I think Brandon Ingram has tried his best to be that guy, but that's a lot to ask of him. But yeah, they clearly just have. They're the economy plus team, as I've called them the whole season. It's like you can look down at the people in economy and say, man, that looks like it's terrible down there. And then you look ahead and you're like, man, look at business class and first class. Those guys are killing it. Like that, those teams are really good. But you can't really get anywhere. So you made an incremental move up, but you are still stuck in a position that I would not say is premier in the league.
Look, man, I'll take those 4 inches of leg room, okay?
Yeah,
Very tall, big guy. I need it.
You're not next to the bathroom. It's great, considering they were like basically in the bathroom the whole season until like Christmas. So, it's an important move, but it does show they've got a long way to go, and they haven't really crossed into that threshold of being like a contender.
Yeah. Wrapping up here with Scott Kushner, does excellent work covering the Pelicans for The Advocate. Go check him out. So tonight, though, back-to-back in Dallas, Zion playing in his first back-to-back. That's good news. Knee looks great. Everything's good on that front. Thoughts on tonight's game and how they match up with the Mavs?
Yeah, Dallas has not played particularly well. They lost to Chicago the other night. I don't think this is some sort of impossible game. They've just been awful against the Mavs all season, but they all came early in the year, so it's going to be a good test. who's going to guard Doncic, who's going to guard Porzingis. I expect you'll see a lot more energy in the early going tonight than you saw last night. The big question is whether or not they can hang on. I think there was kind of a quiet expectation, and no one really talked about it, but they were hoping last night they'd win by 15, 20.
Yeah.
Nobody played more than 30 minutes. Then you kind of come into this one fresh. Instead, you got basically the exact opposite, where they were having to scramble like crazy in the fourth quarter, and they still lost anyway.
Scott, thanks for joining us this morning, man. Thanks for the information.
Absolutely, y'all. Have a great day.
All right, Scott, have a great day.
Kushner, who covers the Pelicans there for The Advocate. He's on Twitter at Scott D. Kushner. Joining us there, talking to us about the Pelicans, who will be in Dallas tonight for a back-to-back. Zion will be active in that one.